And avoiding any other problems, will you commit also to meeting with Mr Enright and his team from Howe & Co. sooner rather than later?
So, Mr Stein, you've asked me that question before as well, and the answer is I won't commit to that.
You won't?
Thank you, Mr.
No, not sooner rather than later. You've just given me a whole bunch of caveats to that meeting. You've just offered to me that you've got some experience in those areas. I will talk to my team about how do we get the value from that conversation. But I'm not going to sit down and commit to meeting Mr Enright tomorrow or today or whenever. I need to have that conversation first.
All right, well, it's avoiding tomorrow.
Well, you said the words tomorrow and today, and was there anything? You gave me a number of caveats.
Before Christmas.
That's enough, gentlemen. That's enough. I think I got the picture.
Well, here we are. This is Mr Patterson. He is the current boss of Fujitsu. He's appeared at the inquiry before, and he's been kind enough to come back, and they question him on different things. One of the things they do end up asking him is about the compensation. Now, Fujitsu has agreed to give some compensation. They haven't been clear as to whether they're giving it to the postmasters or to the post office, and basically they're on the hook because they've messed up. And you'll see how they've clearly made no efforts whatsoever about this compensation or what they're going to do with it or who he's going to go to or anything. They've just literally done absolutely nothing, and they're kind of waiting until the end of the inquiry. But fair enough, but they've just done absolutely nothing, which you'll see. But anyway, do give us a like. That does help to push the video out, and do subscribe if you feel that's appropriate. And do put in the comments as to what you think of this character, because there's different people appear. He certainly seems to be, I don't know if he's tired or something, but he seems to be a little bit tetchy kind of thing. So it's quite an interesting little clip I've put here. Anyway, thank you.
Roman numeral 2, pursuit of shortfalls from postmasters. And we'll see there, Mr Patterson. Let's just read through that together. So this is a letter from you to Mr Reed, and the relevant part that I'm going to take you to therefore says, it seems that the post office may be continuing to pursue postmasters for shortfalls in their accounts using Horizon data. We would have expected that the post office has changed its behaviour in light of the criticisms and is appropriately circumspect with respect to any enforcement actions. It should not be relying on Horizon data as the basis for such shortfall enforcement. Now, this appears to be a fairly serious letter. Did you mean what this says?
I know what I wrote.
Did you mean it?
Well, it's what I wrote, Mr Stein.
Well, you either mean something or you don't, Mr Patterson. Is that correct in what it seems to say, which is the post office should not be using Horizon data to go after sub-postmasters for shortfalls?
I think, as I've said during the last hour or so, there is multiple data points that the post office should be using before they conclude whether a shortfall or a theft has taken place.
Let's try it one more time. Well, let's try it again. It should not be relying on Horizon data as the basis for shortfall enforcement. When you wrote that, was that what you felt?
Yes, Mr Stein.
Do you still stand by that?
I think, as I've given in evidence today several times, you cannot rely on just one data source.
Well, it's not quite the same thing, is it?
No, it is exactly the same thing. It's Horizon data, and I've said you can't rely on one source of data.
Right. So Horizon data should not be used by the post office to go after sub-postmasters for what the post office reckons may be money owed by the sub-postmaster. Is that right?
So, Mr Stein, there's 4 investigations at the moment with the police. We have given material to the police which talks about all the data that they should frankly be looking at to determine whether a theft has taken place or whatever the crime is.
Does it amount to this, Mr Patterson, that perhaps to use that phrase much loved of in this inquiry, with the benefit of hindsight, this sentence should read, it should not be relying solely on Horizon data, etc.
Yes, Sir Wynne, yes.
Fine, thank you.
I have the word basis and solely as interchangeable.
Yeah.
The point you made earlier in your evidence, Mr Patterson, was one whereby you referred to it as one data point. In other words, that there should be something else outside of Horizon Data. Is that what you're trying to say here
And that,
in your evidence?
yes, and that was my point earlier about the complete supply chain that provides information to Horizon and actually to sub-postmasters themselves. You cannot rely solely on one data source.
Right. So on its own, Horizon Data is insufficient to mount a case against a sub-postmaster for a shortfall. Is that what you're trying to
So
say?
I am not a legal person. I'm not a legal. In my view, and in our company's view, you cannot rely on that solely for the data.
To pursue people for shortfalls?
Yes.
Right. And Fujitsu's position on this, will you support the Post Office in pursuing sub-postmasters for shortfalls?
We've said we won't do that.
Right, okay. So let's add this all together. Fujitsu will not support the Post Office if the Post Office is going after a postmaster for a shortfall, either in I suppose, correspondence with that sub-postmaster or in courts. Is that correct?
I thought you were going to add another sentence based solely on Horizon Data.
Well, that's the one you've added today, prompted by Sir Wynne. But
Well, I'll go the other way. Based on shortfall data.
Right.
So whether you want to use basis or solely, the same thing applies.
So what's going to happen? You're going to have to be persuaded that there's something else other than Horizon Data before you provide support to the Post Office? How's it going to work, Mr. Patterson?
So, as I've said in my evidence today, there are multiple data sources, and if you look at the YouGov data about different places where errors or omissions or issues can occur. All of that needs to be in play, and the investigation needs to be not taking a narrow view, but a holistic view.
So are you going to get the Post Office to come to you, provide the data, and then see what else comes up? Or do you need the support, in other words, something other than Horizon Data before you hand over the Horizon Data? Which is it?
So Horizon Data, as I said earlier, will be inside the Post Office's house by February, all historical data. So they'll have all the data that are required. And I think in evidence from several members of the Post Office executive, they've got that data already. So they've got the data that they need. My evidence point is I would like to be satisfied that they are using more than just one data source. And I've not seen anything which tells me that they're using more than one data source.
I see. So in that sense, we put this all together. Frankly, you don't trust the Post Office in order to get this right.
Well, on this particular topic, I absolutely don't trust the Post Office.
I understand that. You mentioned one further point in your evidence to Mr. Blake. This is about the age of the system, okay? You said this. To give this some context, we have not turned off some of this equipment because it's so old.
Mm-hmm.
Help us understand what would happen if you did turn it on.
I've got no idea.
Right.
So in my experience of 35 years in this industry, if you do not do disaster recovery, if you do not turn things on, if you don't keep them upgraded, I cannot determine what will or will not happen, which is part of our nervousness about any extension.
Let's turn back to the question that I asked you now so many months ago in January of this year. Now, I asked you these questions, which was, you're aware of the effect of this scandal upon sub-postmasters. It's felt by their families, by their loved ones, by their partners, by their children. This devastated not only the sub-postmasters' individual lives, but everyone around them. Sub-postmasters, because they could not see what was going on, would sometimes blame their own partners or their employees. And the effect, therefore, of this scandal is much more widespread than on the sub-postmasters themselves, whose lives sometimes have been terminated by this scandal. And I asked you this. Will Fujitsu commit to providing funds in recompense for all those hurts to others outside of sub-postmasters and the compensation scheme? In other words, financial redress to support others that have been affected. I ask this. You may want to think that what could be done by Fujitsu is supporting people in the future, sub-postmasters in future entrepreneurial endeavours, their families in such or in education. Will Fujitsu consider that type of support? And you said this. Mr. Stein, the inquiry and the exploration of the history of all of this is getting a great deal of attention and support from us. Our company here in the UK has many things in society around the country, around the UK. I think the suggestion you've just made, and clearly, you said it, the transcript says clearly in a conversation. I think you meant is a conversation. If I were able to come to engage with sub-postmasters and their representation, their representatives, we would be absolutely something we would like to consider. So you appeared to be giving a positive answer to the general suggestion, which is providing some way to provide support. Today, in answer to the questions on such matters, you said that Fujitsu wishes to engage in a discussion with government. You mentioned also sub-postmasters as to providing the financial support that would go to government. Now, has Fujitsu written off doing something more creative than that? In other words, setting up a fund, bursaries for the children, for the families, those people with lost opportunities? Have they written that off, and is it just going to be money to government?
So when I met the sub-postmasters, there were many, many suggestions. And in fact, one sub-postmaster made it clear to me the company should not be giving any money to government at all. We are not we've got no experience of setting up these things or doing these things. As I just said to the lost families, we were hoping that through government channels we'd be able to provide funds to contribute to some of those areas. To be more creative, we're struggling to find out how we can be more creative, frankly, because that's not something we've got any experience in. I was hoping, equally from this morning's conversation, that there would be more activity in and around the law and changing the law or lobbying for the law to change, because I was personally, as a normal citizen, surprised that the families did not have recourse to some of those other areas of compensation. But I haven't written it off, Mr. Stein. I'm just not quite sure where to go.
Well, where to go, Mr. Patterson, is to go back to the representatives representing people that have been in this situation and say, can you help? We are, if this is right, Fujitsu is trying to see what can be done. Do you have experience with compensation frameworks, redress schemes, restorative justice schemes? And you will find that Howe & Co., Mr. Enright, who sits to my left, who sits to Mr. Kelly's right, you may recall Mr. Kelly from meetings, he does have that expertise. The people are out there, Mr. Patterson. Why haven't you reached out since January of this year to those people that can provide such assistance for you on these important queries?
So there's no reason why I haven't reached out. I've had the meetings, Mr. Stein. Thank you for the suggestion. We'll have the conversation in due course with the colleagues. As an IT company, we are unsure where to go and what to do around it. We were hoping that the compensation schemes and contributing to the government compensation schemes would be a suitable vehicle for redress.
But you know that those compensation schemes are not providing this type of support to the wider family. So all that appears to be happening is Fujitsu is contemplating a contribution, subbing the government for the compensation schemes that are currently in place. That's what you seem to be saying.
So that is what I was saying earlier, and what you've just suggested to me is that your organisation or colleagues may have some expertise in these other areas, and we'll have that conversation.
Is there a standstill agreement between the civil action from the post office and Fujitsu as to whether the one post office will sue the other Fujitsu?
Yes, there is.
So, in essence, what may be happening here, do you agree, Mr. Patterson, is Fujitsu is considering paying some compensation towards the compensation funds in order to stave off as a way of settling the action from the post office against Fujitsu. That's what it appears to be, Mr. Patterson.
Well, it's not, Mr. Stein.
So any funds committed by Fujitsu towards compensation will not be in settlement of the claim between Post Office and Fujitsu. Is that what you're saying?
So Mr. Stein, I've had no conversation with the Post Office about the standstill agreement. That's our legal teams and our legal teams. As far as I'm concerned, if there's any contribution to compensation, it will always be outside that conversation.
And lastly, where in all of this is the situation that's been described, which is that Fujitsu awaits the close of the inquiry. Now, Sir Wynne has asked you some questions. What do you mean by the end of the inquiry? Is that this year, or is that at some point next year when the inquiry reports? Okay, fine. Why is it that Fujitsu wants to wait until the end of the inquiry before dealing with such matters? What's the rationale?
So when I sat in this room in January, there were some things I knew and I didn't know. I've now spent the last 7 months, as you have, listening to evidence about what other people and other organisations did or didn't do. The notion that this is all down to a software bug and has contributed to the largest miscarriage of justice in the United Kingdom is incorrect. These are complex matters, as you well know, based over many, many decades. And we have learnt as an organisation a great deal about the causes of this miscarriage of justice.
Yes, well, let's go back to my question. Why is it that Fujitsu needs to await the close of this inquiry before it deals with matters such as compensation or contributions towards compensation?
For the reasons I've just said, these are complex matters which we need to understand all those components. Now, what we do know, and as I said to Sir Wynne just a moment ago, by the time we get to the end of this week, we'll have a better idea on a number of those topics about how we can contribute. You've given me a suggestion here, and I've already committed to meeting with the lost families.
But Mr Patterson, you already accept that there is a need for Fujitsu to put its money where its mouth is. You already accept that there's at least a discussion to be had about supporting people that have been affected by the scandal. Why wait? Is this legal advice? Wait until the end of the inquiry when it's all gone quiet?
Far from it gone quiet. I don't expect this to go quiet at all. Why should it go quiet? These are serious matters.
But is this your decision to wait till the end of the inquiry, or is it legal advice? What is it, Mr Fujitsu? Who's telling you to wait until the end of the inquiry?
I'm not sure about answering that question fully. He can say, I'm not going to tell you about our legal advice, can't
That's
he?
true, but it is his choice.
Yeah, well, I'm just reminding him he has a choice.
Yes. Mr Patterson?
I mean, the reality, Mr Patterson, isn't it, is that by listening to all the evidence first, you will have a much better idea about the culpability of Fujitsu, if any. Isn't that the reality of it?
Yes, it is, Sir Wynne.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
So the end result of this is that we know that the Post Office has indicated that they wish to bring forward restorative justice proposals. Will Fujitsu commit to supporting that?
So you asked me a question a moment ago, do I trust the Post Office?
Well, you've got a choice, Mr Patterson. You can reject working with the Post Office as you like. Will Fujitsu commit to supporting restorative justice proposals?
So the new management team inside the Post Office, I would welcome that opportunity to sit down and talk to them about those topics. Yes, Mr Stein.
Sooner rather than later, Mr Patterson.
I spoke to the Post Office executives on Friday. I'm speaking to them again on Thursday. So sooner rather than later, yes.
And avoiding any other problems, will you commit also to meeting with Mr Enright and his team from Howe & Co. sooner rather than later?
So, Mr Stein, you've asked me that question before as well, and the answer is I won't commit to that.
You won't?
Thank you, Mr.
No, not sooner rather than later. You've just given me a whole bunch of caveats to that meeting. You've just offered to me that you've got some experience in those areas. I will talk to my team about how do we get the value from that conversation. But I'm not going to sit down and commit to meeting Mr Enright tomorrow or today or whenever. I need to have that conversation first.
All right, well, it's avoiding tomorrow. What
Well,
about
you said the words tomorrow and today, and was there anything? You gave me a number of
about
caveats.
before Christmas?
That's enough, gentlemen. That's enough. I think I got the picture. Thank you very much. And it's finishing dead on time, Mr. Stein, so well done.
Thanks, sir.
Right, good. We'll resume again at 10 o'clock tomorrow. But first, or lastly today, I should thank you, Mr. Patterson, for appearing again at the inquiry, for producing witness statements on behalf of Fujitsu, and making the commitments to the extent that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Wynne. Always be